they should have a social responsibility of using the right words, of not spreading, because in this case it's disinformation. Let's be honest. If they wouldn't be doing that, so maybe people would be able, as I've said, to really be able to identify what is genuine discrimination from what isn't.
Alexa Lavoie for Rebel News, and today I'm with Jean-François Caron. Jean-François Caron is a political scientist and professor at Nazarbayev University in Kazakhstan, but at the moment is a professor invited by the American University of Armenia. And today we want to discuss about the gender ideology madness in Quebec following the judgment of the Human Rights Tribunal about the hairdresser, the hair salon. And Jean-François, I really want to hear you about it because I know you have been speaking a lot about this. What do you make of that? This Human Rights Tribunal now siding with a non-binary individual when the hair salon literally tried to accommodate the website to offer free haircut, but it was not enough for this individual.
Yeah, I think this is representative of what has happened in Canada over the past 20, 25 years, especially with the decisions of the Supreme Court, especially the decision, the Amsalem and Multani decision, that really allowed individuals to sue entities on the basis of discrimination based on their subjective interpretation of religion. So that was really opening a Pandora's box, and now we are witnessing exactly the same thing in cases of gender identities, because objectively they are only two gender. But now if we've opened that door, it basically allows anybody to pretend that they are identifying as whatever they wish and just claim that they are now victim of discrimination. And this is exactly what we've seen with this decision. The judge has simply stated that indeed having just men and women types of haircut at this hair salon was a type of discrimination because that person doesn't identify as either one of these identities. So this is the continuation of an extreme logic that was established 20, 25 years ago in the cases of religious identities, religious beliefs. Now it has entered in the spectrum of gender identities. And knowing that nowadays are hundreds, if not thousands of people who seem to believe that it is possible to identify as whatever they want, it is simply opening a greater door, a greater slippery slope, and we can expect to see many more of these cases in the upcoming months, in the upcoming years, which will probably create some sort of a message, like people who are entrepreneurs, who are willing to open businesses, now they will basically be walking on eggs because they will be establishing list of prices, they will be using a vocabulary without any form of malice, without having the guarantee that because they are using a specific word, which is neutral, there's nothing discriminatory about it, now they no longer have the guarantee that someone in 6 months, in 5 years from now, won't come and say, the use of this word is a discrimination against my subjective type of identity, and therefore I'm suing you for $15,000, $20,000. So this is definitely not a climate that will be favorable to the entrepreneur spirit in Canada.
So we can actually have two different other judgments from the Human Rights Tribunal. There is the pedophile that wanted to be hired by a lawyer cabinet, and the lawyer cabinet had to pay $5,000 to that person. Also, there is the other individual in BC who was charged with $750,000 just because the person was saying that there is two gender, two sexes. Where are we going with that?
Well, there's no more limits to tolerance because we've been living in this system over the past few decades. People are being told you need to be tolerant at all costs. Don't discriminate because this is wrong, this is bad. And this is the situation you end up facing when there is no more tolerance, no more red lines, and everything is subjective. You cannot have common norms when everything is subjective. You are 40 million people living in Canada, meaning that in theory, there are 40 million different types of norms. How can you organize a society when common norms are no longer possible because you're simply refusing to accept reality? As it might have been the case in the 1980s and the 1990s, especially before these two decisions that I've mentioned if my memory is correct, in 2001 and 2004. So basically about 25 years ago.
But what is the danger when a topic is now toxic? You can't actually talk about it. Like, we couldn't talk about COVID-19. We couldn't talk about abortion. Now we cannot talk about gender ideology without being labeled as bigot, as homophobic, as, you know.
So it creates censorship. People now know, I was mentioning now, imagine you want to open an hair salon. You're going to put a bunch of words on your list of price without being sure that maybe someone, let's say someone comes in 6 months and say, I identify as a dog. And there's nothing on your price list about a haircut for a dog. It is discriminatory. I'm therefore suing you based on this jurisprudence by the commission. There is that person now has a leverage to sue that hair salon. So who on earth will want to open a hair salon not knowing that there are norms and rules that are generally admitted? And it's the same thing with people. If you say that there are only two genders, if you're saying these sorts of things, you are now exposing yourselves to being sued by these individuals who will say that what you did was discriminatory towards them. They were offended, and now you need to pay the price for this. So people are going to start walking on eggs. They will stop expressing themselves, and it's simply going to create a general form of censorship, and which will be highly hypocritical. Let me just give you an example. Mark Carney, at his speech in Davos, was giving this famous example by Václav Havel, the Czech dissident, who was saying in the USSR in the 1970s, people, when they were opening their shop in the morning, they were putting posters like a glory to the members of the proletariat and down with capitalism. They did not believe in none of this, but in order not to be labeled, identified as enemies of the states or dissident, they were just displaying these posters without believing in the message.
In 1978, the Czech dissident Václav Havel, later president, wrote an essay called The Power of the Powerless. And in it, he asked a simple question: how did the communist system sustain itself? And his answer began with a greengrocer. Every morning, this shopkeeper places a sign in his window: "Workers of the world unite." He doesn't believe it. No one does. But he places the sign anyway to avoid trouble, to signal compliance, to get along. And because every shopkeeper on every street does the same, the system persists. Not through violence alone, but through the participation of ordinary people in rituals they privately know to be false.
Nowadays, people are going to start doing exactly the same thing. They're going to start waving the transgender flag, not because they believe in the cause, but simply because they don't want to be sued. They won't want to be identified as bigots, people who are homophobics, misogynists, name them, just so just the society, the other people in the society will just leave them alone. So it is in a certain way creating a form of fear, as it was the case, like Václav Havel was describing in the 1970s in USSR. So in a certain way, we are copying, we're on this trend of copying exactly the logic that Václav Havel was describing under USSR, which was a totalitarian type of system. So people are now afraid, and they're just waving a flag without believing in the message because they don't want to lose their job. They want to keep their job. They want to get the promotion they're expecting to have. And so it simply leads, because a very small minority of individuals, it leads to a global type of hypocrisy on the part of individuals who simply don't want to lose their material benefits. So it's pathetic when you think about it.
Well, in terms of the population, when you are pushing something down to the throat of citizens, is there any risk to see bigotry and hate fueled by always giving more privilege, more exposure to the minority, while diabolizing everybody who is against it.
Yeah, so it's a spectrum. So, and this is so classical in politics. Whenever a position goes on one end of the spectrum, it always comes back towards the other end of the spectrum. So, of course, now we're seeing a rise of misogyny and homophobic comments, and it is because this logic simply went too far, and some people are fed up with it. And many people belonging to the gay community, they're also saying the same thing I'm saying, because they've been fighting for the past 50, 60 years to have their rights recognized, not to be victim of discrimination anymore. They fought, they were beaten up, they were discriminated, but after fighting for so long, their rights were recognized. And now I think in Canada, broadly speaking, the overall majority of Canadians don't have any problems with gays and lesbians. But now even members of this community, they're starting to see the counter reaction, and they're starting to realize that they are also part of this counter reaction. And they feel like they are going backwards, 20, 30 years backwards, and they feel that everything that they've fought for is now being destroyed by these narcissists who are simply looking for attention. So they feel that their historical rights are now being threatened by these individuals, and I feel for them, because inevitably they will also be the victim of this counter reaction.
How, as a society, we see what is happening in the US regarding gender ideology and all kind of ideology, but how, as a society, we can actually bring back the pendulum without infringing of the rights of the real people who are suffering gender dysphoria, who are transgender. How do we bring back normality?
Well, I think the biggest responsibility belongs to journalists, mainstream media. People are listening to them. I think they have the responsibility to just start using the right words to describe the reality as it is, and not the subjective reality of some narcissists who are simply looking for attention. If they would make that job, people would be able to understand, to make that distinction between individuals who, because of an objective reality, are really facing discrimination, in comparison with narcissists who are simply coming up with subjective ways of identifying themselves simply for the sake of getting some sort of attention. If they would do that job, politicians would follow, and I think we could end up with a form of reasoned balance in which we would not deny individuals who deserve some rights. We would not deny them their rights, but we would be able to establish a clear red line between what is tolerable, what is acceptable, from what isn't.
That includes the deceased gun person.
But the thing is, we saw what happened with Tumbler Ridge. They were portraying the killer as a woman, using the pronoun her and she, and literally like lying to the public, because literally the killer was a man. So if they cannot do that, do you have any hope that the media will actually maybe wake up and start like acting as they should do, and telling facts and truth to the public?
Unfortunately, I'm not really optimistic about them. I think they've simply embraced this doxa, this type of belief, and they're just it's a form of cancer. It's metastasis, and they're simply contributing to the spreading of this disease. Unfortunately, so it's sad that the medias have a social responsibility. They should have a social responsibility of using the right words, of not spreading, because in this case it's disinformation. Let's be honest. If they wouldn't be doing that, so maybe people would be able, as I've said, to really be able to identify what is genuine discrimination from what isn't, from what is rather a type of narcissism. But unfortunately I'm not optimistic about them being able to do that job. And I think we rather need to rely on the alternative medias who have the guts, who have the courage to say these things, because they don't feel that these people have some sort of a leverage against them.
At Urban News, we started a petition at stopclassroomgrooming.com. If you believe that we need to stop this gender indoctrination in school, go and sign the petition, and please share it widely. Thanks for watching.